There are some smells that never leave a man. Sitting here on my porch in Copper Springs, I smell the sage tea steaming in this clay cup. And just like that, I'm back there 5 years ago, Shadow Creek Ranch. The morning everything changed. My grandson shifts in his chair beside me. "Abuelito," he says, "is it true what they say about the widow of Shadow Creek?" I smile, but it's a sad smile. The kind old men wear when they remember things that hurt and heal at the same time. "What do they say, mijo?" "That she fought off a whole army, that she was some kind of warrior, that she made a big company run away." I take a slow sip of tea, let the taste settle on my tongue. Sage and honey, the way Nora always made it. "The stories get bigger each time they're told," I say. But yes, it's true, all of it in its own way, though the truth is stranger than what people say. The boy leans forward. He's 10 years old enough to hear this story, old enough to understand why it matters. "Tell me," he says. So I will. Because somebody needs to remember what really happened. Before the legend swallows the truth. Before people forget that Nora Redpath was a real woman who bled and hurt and loved. Before they turn her into some kind of ghost story. Let me tell you about the widow of Shadow Creek Ranch. And I'll tell it true. It was a Tuesday morning in late June when I first knew trouble was coming. I'd been cooking at Shadow Creek Ranch for 35 years. Started when Nora's parents were still alive. Watched that little girl grow up from 7 years old. Saw her become a woman. Saw her fall in love with James Redpath. Cooked the food for their wedding. And 3 years before this Tuesday morning, I'd cooked the food for James's funeral. After James died, I kept coming to the ranch. Not every day anymore. I'd retired by then, moved into town. But once a week I'd drive out with food. Chicken soup usually. Blue corn tortillas. Sometimes tamales if I had the energy. The things that say you're not alone better than words ever could. That Tuesday I arrived just after dawn, the way I always did. Shadow Creek Ranch sat on a gentle rise in the Painted Valley. Adobe house with thick walls to keep out the heat. Old barn that had seen better days. A mesquite tree older than anyone could remember, spreading its twisted branches over the front yard. The desert stretched away in all directions. Red earth and sage. Distant mesas painted copper and gold by the rising sun. It was beautiful land, sacred land. 10 generations of Nora's family had defended it, bled for it, died for it. I parked my old truck and grabbed the container of soup from the passenger seat. Still warm. I'd made it that morning before the sun came up. That's when I saw her. Nora sat on the porch in her wooden rocking chair, cup of tea in her hands. Shadow, her wolf dog, lying at her bare feet. She wore a simple cotton dress, her long black hair pulled back, that single streak of silver catching the early light. She looked peaceful. That's what anyone would have thought. But I'd known her since she was 7 years old. I saw what others didn't. The way her eyes never stopped moving, the way she held herself, straight-backed and ready, the way her fingers rested on Shadow's head, steady as stone. Nora Redpath looked peaceful, the way a coiled snake looks peaceful. "Buenos dias, Tomas," she called out. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Morning, mija." I climbed the 3 wooden steps to her porch, set the soup down on the small table beside her chair. "Chicken soup, the way you like it." "You spoil me." "Somebody has to," she smiled. Just a small movement of her lips. In 3 years, I'd never seen her smile reach her eyes, not since James died. We sat there in comfortable silence for a moment. That's one thing I loved about Nora. She didn't need to fill every silence with words. She understood that sometimes quiet is its own kind of conversation. "The garden is doing well," I said, gesturing toward the medicinal herbs growing in neat rows beside the house. "Sage and yerba santa, chamomile and desert lavender. James taught me well," she said. She always spoke of him that way, present tense wrapped around past tense, like he was still teaching her, still walking beside her. I suppose in a way he was. Shadow's ears suddenly pricked forward. The big animal lifted his head, yellow eyes fixed on something I couldn't see yet. A low rumble started in his chest. Nora's hand stilled on his head. "Quiet," she whispered. The dog fell silent, but the tension in his body remained. That's when I heard it, the distant sound of engines. Getting closer. Nora set down her tea with careful precision, stood up slow and smooth. No rush, no panic, just readiness. "Tomas," she said, still looking toward the road, "you should go inside." "What's happening?" "Company," she said. "The unwelcome kind." 4 pickup trucks came thundering across the wooden bridge that marked the entrance to Shadow Creek Ranch. Expensive trucks with lifted suspensions and oversized tires. They moved in formation, like they'd done this before. Dust billowed behind them in a red cloud. It hung in the air like smoke. I didn't go inside. I moved to the kitchen window where I could watch, where I could see without being seen. Old habit from when I was young, and trouble came to the reservation more often than rain. The trucks formed a semicircle in front of Nora's house. Engines cut off one by one. The dust began to settle. 8 men climbed out. I counted them automatically, noted their positions, the way they moved. The subtle bulges under their jackets that said they were armed. 7 of them looked like hired muscle, hard eyes, careful postures. Men who got paid to intimidate, but the 8th man was different. He stepped out of the lead truck wearing an expensive leather jacket. Too hot for the desert, too clean for ranch country. His smile was white and perfect and utterly false. Everything about him screamed money and power and the kind of confidence that comes from never hearing the word no. The tall man approached the porch. His boots clicked on the wooden steps. "Mrs. Redpath," he called out. His voice had that smooth quality salespeople use, friendly on the surface, empty underneath. "Beautiful morning for a visit, isn't it?" Nora remained standing, one hand resting on Shadow's head. The big dog's ears were flat against his skull. His yellow eyes tracked the stranger with predatory focus. "I'm Victor Blackwell," the man continued, "CEO of Sunfire Resources. I believe my representatives have reached out to you several times over the past month." From my position at the kitchen window, I could see Nora's profile. Her face showed nothing, no fear, no anger, just that same quiet readiness I'd seen 1,000 times. "They have," she said simply. I knew about those letters. She'd shown me the first one, a purchase offer for the ranch. Generous, they'd said. Fair market value and then some. But wrapped in language that made it clear this wasn't really a request. She'd burned that letter in her fire pit. Burned all 4 of them one by one. Watched the ashes spiral up into the night sky. Blackwell took another step up. Shadow's growl deepened. 2 of the men behind Blackwell moved their hands toward their jackets. Not drawing weapons, not yet. Just reminding everyone they were there. "I understand you've been through a difficult time," Blackwell said. His tone dripped with false sympathy. "Running a ranch this size alone, after your husband's passing, that must be challenging." I felt anger rise in my chest, the way he said it, like James's death was just another business opportunity, like grief was leverage. But Nora's voice stayed level. "I manage." "Of course you do." Blackwell's smile didn't waver. "But our offer would provide you with financial security. Freedom to start fresh somewhere more hospitable, somewhere easier." The sun had climbed higher now. Heat was building. One of Blackwell's men wiped sweat from his forehead. Nora stood in the shade of her porch, perfectly still, not a drop of sweat on her. "My land isn't for sale," she said, each word clear and final. "Not now, not ever." Something flickered in Blackwell's eyes, just for a moment. Anger quickly covered. He was a man used to getting his way, used to people bending when he applied pressure. "Mrs. Redpath," his voice hardened slightly. "Nora, the desert is changing. The Federal Land Bureau has approved resource exploration throughout the valley. Your neighbors have already signed agreements with us. The Hendersons, Old Man Sosi. You're going to be surrounded by operations eventually." I knew he was telling the truth about the neighbors. I'd heard the talk in town. Seen the Henderson place already being surveyed. Watched old Sosie sign his papers at the diner, his hands shaking. But I also knew what Blackwell didn't say. That the Hendersons' water pump had mysteriously failed 3 times. That Sosie's horses had died at the watering hole right before he signed. Accidents, everyone said. Coincidences. Nora knew it too. I could tell by the way her jaw tightened, just slightly. Then I'll become accustomed to the noise, she said. A younger man stepped forward from beside one of the trucks, expensive suit, tablet in his manicured hands. Mrs. Redpath, our preliminary offer is $2.7 million, significantly above market value. But Mr. Blackwell has authorized me to go as high as $3.2 million. $3.2 million. For most people in Copper Springs, that was a fortune beyond imagining. Enough to retire, to start over, to never worry about money again. Nora didn't even look at the young man. Her eyes stayed on Blackwell. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to reach all 8 men. "I've made my position clear. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have morning chores." She turned slightly, as if to go back into her house. Blackwell's professional mask slipped further. "Mrs. Redpath, I encourage you to think carefully about your future. Resource development is coming to Painted Valley, whether individual residents welcome it or not. The wise ones are choosing to benefit rather than resist the inevitable." It was a threat. Polite words wrapped around it, but a threat nonetheless. One of Blackwell's men had been hanging back from the others, leaner than the rest, a jagged scar running from his right temple to his jawline. While the others watched Blackwell and Nora, this one's eyes swept the property, the house, the barn, the approaches and exits. His gaze was professional, tactical. This wasn't his first operation. When his eyes finally settled on Nora, something shifted in his expression, just for a heartbeat. Like he'd seen something that didn't match his expectations, something that made him reassess. "Reyes!" Blackwell called sharply. The scarred man rejoined the group without a word. Blackwell produced a business card from his jacket, set it deliberately on the porch railing. "Think about it, Mrs. Redpath. We'll be in touch." The men returned to their trucks. Engines roared to life. The convoy pulled away in the same tight formation they'd arrived in, dust rising behind them like a warning. I watched from the window until they disappeared across the bridge, until the sound of engines faded into the vast silence of the desert. Only then did I step back onto the porch. Nora still stood there, shadow pressed against her leg. She was staring at the business card on the railing. "Nora," I said quietly. She didn't respond right away, just kept looking at that card. Finally she picked it up, held it between 2 fingers. "They'll be back," she said. "I know. With more than words next time." "I know that too." She turned to look at me then, and for just a moment I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in 3 years, not since before James died. A kind of cold calculation, an awareness. It reminded me of the way she used to look when she was 12 years old and her grandfather was teaching her to fight. Before she chose peace. Before she chose James and this quiet life. "Tomas," she said. "Do you remember what my grandfather used to say?" "Which thing?" "White Knife said a lot of things. About the knife." I nodded slowly. I remembered. "The knife is the last resort, but when drawn, it must be absolute." Yes, she looked back toward the road where the dust was still settling. I'd hoped I'd never have to remember that lesson. She walked to the fire pit beside the house, the one where she burned sage for ceremonies, where she'd burned Blackwell's letters. I watched as she held the business card over the ashes, but she didn't light it on fire. Not this time. Instead, she tucked it into her pocket, turned back to me. "The soup," she said. "Is it still warm?" "Should be." "Good. Let's eat. I have a feeling I'm going to need my strength in the days ahead." We went inside. I heated the soup on her wood stove, served it in the clay bowls James had made during their first year of marriage. We ate in silence, watching the morning light paint the desert in shades of gold and red. But my mind was turning over what I'd seen, the way Nora had stood on that porch, The men with their guns and their threats. The scarred one, Reyes, and the way he'd looked at her. Most of all, I thought about what I'd glimpsed in Nora's eyes. That cold awareness, that readiness. The widow of Shadow Creek Ranch had been sleeping for 3 years, but I'd just watched her start to wake up. And I knew deep in my bones that Copper Springs was about to learn something it had forgotten. Something the desert had always known, that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't the rattlesnake that announces itself. It's the one that stays perfectly still until the moment it strikes. 2 days passed after Blackwell's visit. 2 days of desert heat and silence. 2 days where I watched Nora tend her garden, feed her chickens, repair fence posts, moving through her routines like nothing had changed. But I knew better. I saw the way she paused sometimes, listening to sounds carried on the wind. The way Shadow stayed closer to her than usual. The way her hands moved when she worked with her medicinal plants. Steady, yes, but with a kind of focused attention that reminded me of someone preparing for battle. On Thursday afternoon, I was in town at Rose's General Store when I heard the motorcycle. Everyone in Copper Springs knew that sound, the deep rumble of Sheriff Manuel B.'s old Indian chief. He'd been riding that bike since before I started cooking at Shadow Creek Ranch. Said it helped him think, being out on the open road with nothing but engine noise and desert wind. I was buying cornmeal when Manuel walked in. He was 60 years old, his face bronzed by decades under the desert sun. Silver streaked through his black hair. He wore his sheriff's badge on a shirt that had seen better days, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who'd seen his people struggle for too long. "Tomas," he nodded at me. "Manuel." He bought coffee and jerky, the way he always did, but as we walked out together he spoke quietly. "You were at the ranch when they came. The Sunfire people." It wasn't a question. I was. "How's Nora holding up?" I considered the question. How do you explain what I'd seen in her eyes? That mixture of grief and steel? "She's strong," I said finally. "Like always." Manuel looked toward the mountains. "I heard things, Tomas, about what's happened to other ranchers who said no to these people. The Henderson place. Old Sosi." "Accidents," I said carefully. "Yeah." His voice was dry as the desert. "Accidents." He turned to look at me directly. "I'm going out there, to Shadow Creek." "You coming?" I followed him on the winding road out of town. His motorcycle kicked up dust. My truck labored behind, engine complaining about the heat. We found Nora in her garden. She knelt among the herbs, her hands deep in the red earth, sage and chamomile, desert lavender and yerba santa. Plants that heal. Plants that remember. James had taught her about these plants. Before he became a water conservationist, he'd studied traditional medicine. Said the old ways of healing were being forgotten. That the desert knew things modern medicine had lost. Together, they'd built this garden. Plant by plant, season by season. Shadow announced us before we reached the garden gate. That deep warning bark that said, "Friend, but stay cautious anyway." Nora looked up. Dirt smudged her cheek. For just a moment, I saw the girl she'd been, 7 years old, helping her mother in this same garden, before White Knife started her training, before she became what she became. "Manuel," she said, standing and brushing dirt from her hands. "Tomas." "Afternoon, Nora." The sheriff removed his hat, a gesture of respect. "Mind if we talk?" She gestured toward the old mesquite tree. We settled on the bench James had built there, in the shade. Nora brought water in clay cups. Nobody spoke for a moment. Finally Manuel said, "I heard about Blackwell's visit. News travels fast. Small town." He paused. "I wanted to check that everything was peaceful." "It was," Nora said. "They made their offer. I declined. They left." "That's it?" "That's it." Manuel's jaw tightened. He looked at me, then back at Nora. "I'm going to be straight with you," he said. "These people, they're not playing by normal rules. There have been incidents with other landowners who refused their initial offers." "What kind of incidents?" "Water pumps failing, fences cut, livestock dying with no obvious cause." His voice grew harder. Old Sosi found 2 of his horses dead at the watering hole last month. Week later, he signed with Sunfire. I watched Nora's face. It remained calm, but her hands, resting on her knees, tightened slightly. The Hendersons had 3 separate problems with their irrigation system, Manuel continued. Just enough to make life impossible out here, never enough to prove sabotage. Have you investigated? Nora asked. The sheriff's expression turned bitter. Tried to. No witnesses, no evidence that would stand up. And the county commission just cut my budget for rural patrols. Commissioner Wilson says it's necessary reorganization. He paused. His brother-in-law works for Sunfire's legal team. Nora nodded slowly, understanding without needing it spelled out. I'm worried about you out here alone, Manuel said. These people, they see land as just resources to extract, profit to be made. They don't understand what this place means, what it's meant for generations. I can take care of myself. Something in her voice made Manuel study her more carefully. I saw him reassessing, remembering, perhaps, that Nora Redpath hadn't always been a quiet widow who grew herbs and sold them at farmers' markets. James always said you were the strongest person he'd ever known, Manuel said quietly. At the mention of her husband's name, Nora's expression softened, just slightly. James, she said, believed strength came in many forms. He did, Manuel hesitated. My nephew Miguel returned from his 3rd deployment last month. Marine Force Recon. Good kid. Solid. He's looking for work while he decides what comes next. He looked at Nora directly. Having someone else around during daylight hours might make certain people reconsider their approach. I could see Nora considering it. The tactical advantage of having help. Someone trained. Someone who understood conflict. Send him by tomorrow, she said. No promises, but we can talk. After Manuel left, Nora walked the perimeter of her property. I watched from the porch as she moved along the fence line, studying the land with new eyes. She was mapping it, I realized, seeing it not as her peaceful ranch, but as territory to defend. It reminded me of something I'd witnessed 30 years ago. Nora was 12 years old. It was summer, the desert burning under relentless sun. Her grandfather, White Knife, had taken her to the arroyo east of the ranch. I'd followed at a distance, carrying water and food. My role was always to support, to witness, never to interfere with the training. White Knife was in his 70s then, but he moved like a man half his age, lean and hard as the desert itself. His hands were scarred from decades of knife work. His eyes missed nothing. Tell me what you see, he said to young Nora. She stood in the arroyo, looking around. Rocks, sand, creosote bushes. Look again. This time she was quiet for a long moment. I watched her eyes move, taking in details, learning to see. Cover, she said finally. The rocks provide cover. The bushes conceal movement. The arroyo channels anyone approaching from the east. White Knife nodded. The land is your first weapon, before the knife, before your hands. The land itself will fight for you if you understand it. He drew his knife then. Not the sacred one. That would come later, when she'd earned it. This was a practice blade, worn smooth from years of training. But understanding alone isn't enough, he continued. You must also have the will to use what you know, the discipline to wait for the right moment, and the acceptance that violence, when necessary, must be absolute. Young Nora watched him with an intensity that was almost frightening. She was small for 12, skinny. People in town thought she was fragile because she was quiet. They didn't know what I knew, what her grandfather was teaching her. Why absolute, she asked. Because half measures in combat get you killed. When you draw the knife, it's because all other options have failed. And when there are no other options, you cannot hesitate. You cannot show mercy to someone trying to kill you or destroy what you protect. He handed her the practice knife, showed her the grip, the angle, the way to hold the blade so it became an extension of her arm rather than a separate tool. But little knife, he said, that was his name for her always, you must also understand this. The knife is the last resort. Not the first, not the second, the last. Our people learned this truth through centuries of blood. We fought when we had to, but we survived because we knew when not to fight. She practiced the movements he showed her, slow at first, then faster. Her small body moving with a grace that would one day become deadly. I remember thinking then, this girl is going to be something remarkable. I didn't know yet how right I was, or how much it would cost her. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of copper and gold, I made dinner for Nora. Red chile stew the way her mother used to make it. Blue corn tortillas. Beans cooked slow with cumin and garlic. We ate on the porch as the heat of the day faded into desert coolness. "Tell me about Miguel," Nora said. "Manuel's nephew, 28 years old, 3 tours overseas. Force recon means he's seen serious combat." "Why did he come back here?" I shrugged. "Same reason most of them come back to places like Copper Springs. Looking for something they lost over there. Peace, maybe, purpose, or just trying to remember who they were before the war." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Do you think he can handle trouble? Military kind? Probably better than most. But this isn't war, mija. It's something different." "Yes," she said softly. "It is." We finished eating as the first stars appeared. The desert at night has a sound all its own, not quite silence, the whisper of wind through sage, distant coyote calls, the small sounds of creatures moving in darkness. "Tomas," Nora said finally, "do you remember when James and I first came here?" Of course I remembered. How could I forget? It was 18 years ago. Nora was 24, fresh from leaving the reservation where she'd grown up. She'd spent those years training with White Knife and the other elders, learning the knife, learning to fight, learning the sacred traditions of her people. But she'd also grown tired of violence, even in training, tired of being prepared for battles that never came, tired of carrying the weight of 10 generations of warriors on her shoulders. She left, went to college in Tucson, studied environmental science, tried to become someone different. That's where she met James Redpath. He was a water conservationist, passionate about protecting desert aquifers. He came to give a lecture at the university. Nora attended more out of curiosity than interest, but something about the way he spoke caught her attention. He talked about water as sacred, about the desert as a living thing that deserved protection, about fighting for what mattered, but fighting with science and law rather than weapons. After the lecture, they talked for 3 hours. Within 6 months, they were married. James inherited Shadow Creek Ranch from a distant uncle. It wasn't much, rough land, old buildings, barely enough water to sustain cattle. But he saw potential, and Nora saw something else. She saw home. The land her ancestors had defended was adjacent to Shadow Creek, close enough that she could feel the connection to her past, far enough that she could build something new. I met them the day they arrived, young and in love and full of plans. James wanted to create a sustainable ranch, demonstrate water conservation techniques, grow native plants. Nora wanted peace. I was between jobs then. They hired me to cook, to help around the property. Over the years, I became more than an employee. I became family. I watched them build their life together, plant the garden, fix the house, dream about children they never had time to have. I watched Nora try so hard to bury the warrior she'd been, to become just a rancher's wife, a gardener, a healer. And I watched James love every part of her, the peaceful woman she wanted to be, and the dangerous woman she tried to forget. 3 years into their marriage, Nora showed him the knives she'd hidden in the cellar, the sacred blade her grandfather had given her, the throwing knives, the tools of violence she'd sworn never to use again. I wasn't there for that conversation, but James told me about it later, over whiskey, on this same porch. "She thought I'd leave," he said. "Thought I'd be scared of who she used to be." "What did you tell her?" "That I fell in love with Nora Redpath, the woman she chooses to be every single day, but that I respect Nora Two Rivers, the warrior, the guardian. Both are her, both are real, and I love all of her." He looked at me then with those earnest eyes. Tomas, I believe in peace, in solving problems without violence. But I'm not naive. I know there are people in this world who only understand force. And if that day ever comes, if someone threatens what we've built here, I'm glad Nora knows how to fight, because I don't. 2 weeks later, they put the knives back in their hiding place. For 15 years, they stayed there, untouched, until the cancer came. He made me promise, Nora said now, pulling me back to the present. We were still on the porch. The stew was finished. The stars were bright overhead. Promise what? That I wouldn't let them take this land, that I'd protect what we built together. Her voice was quiet, steady. His last words to me, Tomas, the day before he died. He was so weak he could barely speak, but he held my hand and made me promise. She stood and walked to the porch railing, looked out over the land that stretched away into darkness. I thought I could keep that promise with lawyers, with legal papers, with the system. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. James believed in the system, believed in justice, and I wanted to believe it too, for him. But the system is broken, Tomas. You know it. I know it. Manuel knows it. Commissioner Wilson is in their pocket. The federal permits are rushed through. The courts move too slow. By the time justice comes, if it ever does, the land will be destroyed. Shadow emerged from the darkness and pressed against her leg. She rested her hand on his head. I made James a promise, she said, but I also made my grandfather a promise, that I'd only use the knife as a last resort, that I'd try every other way first. And you have. Have I? She turned to look at me. Or have I just been hiding, pretending I could stay who James wanted me to be, pretending the warrior died with white knife? I didn't have an answer for that. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then Nora went inside. She returned with a clay cup. Steam rose from it. Sage tea, she said, handing it to me, the way white knife taught me to make it. I accepted the cup. The smell brought back memories. The old man teaching young Nora not just to fight, but to be still, to center herself, to find peace even in preparation for violence. Tomorrow Miguel comes, Nora said. I'll hire him, give myself more time, keep trying the peaceful way. And if that doesn't work? She didn't answer directly. Instead she said, Do you know why White Knife called me Little Knife? Because you were small? No, because he said I was the last one, the last of our family line to carry the sacred blade, the last one trained in the old ways. After me, the tradition ends. Unless I pass it on. She looked at me with those dark eyes that had seen too much. The land remembers, Tomas. It remembers every warrior who defended it, every drop of blood spilled to protect it. And when the land remembers, it gives strength to those who honor that memory. A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness. Shadow's ears pricked up, but he didn't move from Nora's side. Go home, Nora said gently. Get some rest. Tomorrow is Friday. Things will start moving faster soon. I wanted to argue, to stay, to somehow protect this woman who had become like a daughter to me, but I knew better. Whatever was coming, Nora would face it in her own way, on her own terms. I drove back to Copper Springs under a sky full of stars, the taste of sage tea still on my tongue, and I wondered which Nora would be there when I returned. The peaceful widow tending her garden, or White Knife's granddaughter preparing for war. Miguel B.A. arrived at Shadow Creek Ranch just after sunrise on Friday morning. I was already there, making breakfast. Eggs and chorizo, fresh tortillas warming on the stove, the smell of coffee filling the kitchen. Nora sat at the table, cleaning her fingernails. They were stained dark with soil from the garden. But I noticed something else, small cuts on her palms, fresh. The kind you get from handling rope or wire. She'd been up early, doing something. I didn't ask what. Through the kitchen window, I watched a dusty blue Jeep navigate the winding road to the ranch. It moved carefully, respectfully, not like Blackwell's trucks that had charged across the bridge like an invasion. The Jeep parked near the barn. A young man stepped out. Miguel was powerfully built, with close-cropped hair and the kind of watchful eyes that never stop scanning. Even in civilian clothes, jeans and a simple t-shirt, everything about him said military. The way he stood, the way he looked at the property, noting approaches and sight lines before walking toward the house. Shadow emerged from under the porch. The big wolf dog approached Miguel with ears forward. Curious, not hostile. Miguel stopped, didn't try to pet the animal or challenge it, just gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. Respectful. Smart, I thought. Shadow liked him already. Mrs. Redpath, Miguel called toward the porch. I'm Miguel B. My uncle said you might have work available. Nora stepped outside, wiping her hands on a cloth. She studied him for a long moment, taking his measure the way White Knife had taught her, not just looking, but seeing. Your uncle speaks highly of you, she said finally. 3 tours. Force recon. Yes, ma'am. Any experience with ranch work? A hint of a smile crossed his serious face. Grew up helping my grandfather with his sheep before I joined the Corps. I know my way around hard work and tough conditions. Come inside, Nora said. Have breakfast, then we'll walk the property. Over eggs and coffee, I watched them talk. Nora asked questions, not about combat or military service, about the land, about water systems, about fixing things with limited resources. Miguel answered thoughtfully. He understood practical work, understood making do with what you had, but I saw him glancing at Nora when he thought she wasn't looking, trying to reconcile the quiet widow with something his uncle must have told him, something that didn't quite add up. After breakfast, they walked the property together. I cleaned up the dishes and watched through the window as Nora showed Miguel the solar water pump, the irrigation channels, the fence lines that needed repair. She was testing him, I realized. Not just his knowledge, but his awareness. The way he moved, the way he observed. Miguel passed every test without knowing he was being tested. They returned an hour later as the morning heat was building. The job is yours if you want it, Nora said. 5 days a week, standard wages plus lunch, 2-week trial period. When can I start? Right now. We're reinforcing the water storage system today. Miguel nodded once. Sharp. Military efficient. Yes, ma'am. They worked together through the morning. I brought them water at midday, watched them repair cisterns and check pipes. Miguel worked hard, asked smart questions, and most importantly, he stayed alert. Around 2 in the afternoon, he paused and looked toward the road. Mrs. Redpath, he said carefully. On my way here this morning, I noticed a vehicle parked about 2 miles back. Behind that rock formation, locals call Eagle's Rest. Nora set down her wrench. What kind of vehicle? Dark green Ford Explorer, tinted windows. No reason for anyone to be parked there unless they're watching this road. Did they see you notice them? No, ma'am. I'm careful about things like that. Made it look like I was checking something on my Jeep while I got a better view using my side mirror. 2 men inside. One had binoculars. Surveillance, I thought. Just like Manuel warned. But Nora's response was calm, almost like she'd expected it. Thank you for letting me know, she said simply, then went back to work. Miguel watched her for a moment. I could see him processing, understanding that this quiet widow wasn't surprised by surveillance, wasn't frightened by it. He was starting to see what I already knew, that there was more to Nora Redpath than met the eye. That evening, after Miguel left, Nora did something I hadn't seen her do in years. She went to the barn and climbed to the hayloft. I followed at a distance, staying quiet. Not spying exactly, just concerned. From the shadows below, I watched her move aside hay bales, reveal a trapdoor I'd forgotten existed. She descended into the old root cellar. 10 minutes later, she emerged carrying a wooden case. Even from where I stood, I recognized it, the case her grandfather had given her, the one that held the knives. She sat in the hayloft with the case open in front of her, didn't draw the weapons, just looked at them in the fading light that streamed through the barn's high window. I left before she could know I'd seen. Some moments are too private to witness. Saturday morning, I arrived to find Nora in her garden again, but this time something was wrong. She knelt by the irrigation channel, a small testing kit beside her. the kind James used to use for checking water quality. Her face was tight with concentration. "Nora?" I approached carefully. She held up a hand. "Wait." I waited while she finished her test, watched her face grow harder as she read the results. "The water," she said finally, "it's contaminated." "What?" She showed me the test strip. I couldn't read the specific numbers, but I understood the color coding. Red where it should be green. Heavy metals, industrial chemicals. Not enough to kill immediately, but enough to sicken over time. Her voice was ice cold. "It's coming from upstream, from the neighboring property. The Henderson place, the one that Sunfire had already acquired." "Could it be accidental?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No." She stood, dust from the garden on her knees. "James taught me too well. This level of contamination doesn't happen by accident. Someone is introducing chemicals into the watershed." She looked toward the east, where the Henderson property lay beyond the low ridge. "I'm going there," she said. "Now." "Nora, maybe we should call Manuel." "And tell him what? That I suspect contamination? He'll need to file reports, get approval for testing, wait for the county to respond. By then my well will be poisoned, my garden will be dead, and they'll have what they want, me desperate enough to sell." She was right. I knew she was right. "Then I'm coming with you," I said. "No, stay here. If I'm not back in 2 hours, call Manuel." Before I could argue, she was already walking toward her truck. She told me later what happened at the Henderson place. The old ranch had been transformed, survey equipment everywhere, a drilling rig set up near the eastern boundary, men in hard hats and safety vests moving around with clipboards and tablets. And supervising it all, standing beside a white company truck, was the scarred man. Reyes. Nora parked her truck and walked straight toward the drilling operation. No hesitation, no fear. 3 workers moved to intercept her, but Reyes held up a hand. "Mrs. Redpath," he said. His voice was neutral, professional. "This is private property. Sunfire Resources has legal rights to operate here." "And I have legal rights to uncontaminated water," Nora replied. She held up her test kit. "Your operation is poisoning my watershed." Reyes' expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or respect. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "It's a documented fact." They stood facing each other in the harsh midday sun. Nora told me later she could see it then. The way Reyes moved, the way he held himself. It wasn't just military training, it was something more specific, something familiar. "You're using horizontal drilling to map the mineral deposits," Nora said, "and your drilling mud contains chemicals that are leaching into the aquifer. Whether that's intentional or negligent, the result is the same. You're destroying my water supply." One of the workers, a big man with a red face, laughed. "Lady, you don't know what you're talking about." But Reyes held up his hand again. He was watching Nora with an intensity that made her skin prickle, like he was seeing past the rancher's clothes and sun-weathered skin to something underneath. "Show me your evidence," he said. Nora handed him the test kit results. He studied them carefully. Too carefully for someone who was just hired muscle. "These levels," he said slowly, "they're concerning. I'll report this to management." "Will you?" Nora asked. "Or will they call it an acceptable cost of doing business?" Reyes's jaw tightened. For just a moment she saw conflict in his face. Then his professional mask returned. "I follow orders, Mrs. Redpath, just like you probably followed orders once, long ago." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Nora's eyes narrowed. "You don't know anything about me." "Don't I?" Reyes stepped closer, lowered his voice so the workers couldn't hear. White Knife didn't just train his granddaughter in secret. He trained others too. Special forces, desert warfare specialists. 20 years ago, in a program most people don't know existed. Nora's breath caught. "He talked about you," Reyes continued. "Said his granddaughter would surpass all of us. Said she had the gift, the perfect balance of patience and precision." He paused. "He called you little knife. No one had called her that in 20 years. No one except White Knife himself. "So I know what you are," Reyes said quietly, "just like you're starting to figure out what I am. And Mrs. Redpath, I'm telling you this as someone who respects what your grandfather taught me. Walk away. Sell the land. Take the money. Because what's coming, you can't stop it. Not alone." Is that a threat? It's a warning. From one of White Knife's students to another. Behind them, the sound of heavy machinery suddenly filled the air. Workers shouted, and then, crash. A drum of drilling chemicals tipped over, spilled across the ground, flowing toward the irrigation channel that fed Nora's property. "Accident!" one of the workers yelled. But Nora saw the way he stepped back, the way he didn't move to stop it. This was no accident. She moved fast, grabbed a shovel from the back of a truck, started digging a berm to redirect the flow. Reyes watched for 3 seconds. Then he grabbed another shovel and joined her. Together, they diverted the chemical spill away from the channel, contained it, saved the immediate water supply. When it was done, they stood there breathing hard, covered in mud and chemicals. "Why did you help?" Nora asked. Reyes looked at her for a long moment. "Because White Knife taught me that some things are worth protecting, even when you're being paid not to." He walked away then, barking orders at the workers to clean up the spill properly. Nora collected soil samples from where the chemicals had pooled. Evidence. Then she drove back to Shadow Creek Ranch. She was in the barn when I found her 2 hours later. Miguel had arrived for his Saturday shift. He'd helped me look for Nora, worried when she didn't answer calls. We found her in the hayloft, sitting cross-legged, going through a cardboard box of James's old papers. "Nora?" I climbed up carefully. "What are you looking for?" "James's water testing records," she said without looking up, "from 4 years ago, before he got sick." Miguel stood at the ladder's base, giving her space but staying alert. "Why 4 years?" I asked. "Because that's when Helios International first started their preliminary surveys in this valley, before Sunfire Resources, before the public permits. They were already here, testing, planning." Her hands were shaking slightly as she went through folders and notebooks, laboratory reports, field measurements, James's careful, neat handwriting documenting every test he'd performed. Then she found it. A blue notebook, water-stained, pages wrinkled from moisture and time. She opened it carefully, like it might crumble at her touch. I watched her face as she read, saw the color drain from it, saw her hands tighten on the pages. "Tomas," she whispered. "Oh God, Tomas." I moved closer, looked over her shoulder at James's handwriting. March 2021, unusual readings in aquifer sample. Heavy metals present in concentrations that don't match natural geology. Requires further investigation. April 2021, additional testing confirms foreign contaminants. Chemical signature suggests industrial origin. No known operations in area. How is this possible? May 2021, contacted EPA Regional Office. No response. Contacted State Environmental Department. Told investigation would take 6 to 8 months. June 2021, found survey equipment on federal land north of ranch. Confronted workers. Company name, Helios Technical Services. They claimed mineral assessment permit. Checked with BLM. Permit exists. Approved at federal level. How did this get approved so fast? The entries continued. Month by month, James documenting his growing suspicion, his failed attempts to get authorities interested, his realization that something much larger was happening. Then I saw the entry that made Nora's hands shake. October 2021, received anonymous package. Documents showing Helios International plan to contaminate multiple ranch wells over 2 to 3 year period. Softening up landowners, making them desperate to sell. Chemical levels calculated to cause illness but not immediate death. Plausible deniability. Can't prove this is real, but matches everything I've observed. If true, this is mass poisoning. Attempted murder. How do I stop this? November 2021. Feeling ill. Persistent cough. Doctors think it's allergies, but I know. I've been drinking the water, testing it, documenting it, and now it's in me. The entries became shakier after that. Harder to read. James's illness progressing. December 2021. Cancer diagnosis. Doctors say environmental factors possible, but impossible to prove specific cause. I know, God help me, I know what they did, but I'm too sick to fight now. Tests are hidden, evidence secured. Someone will find this someday. Someone will stop them. The final entry was dated 3 days before James died. Nora doesn't know about this notebook. I've hidden it where only she would think to look. With my research on the Henderson Aquifer connection, she's stronger than she knows, stronger than I ever was. If something happens to me, she'll find this, and she'll do what I couldn't. And if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this fight. I'm sorry I couldn't stop them through legal means like I promised. But you can stop them, not the way I tried, the way you know how. Protect the land, protect our home. Not just for us, but for everyone. They're planning to poison the whole valley. 10 ranches, maybe more, hundreds of people. You're the only one who can prevent it. I love you. I'm so proud of who you chose to become. But don't be afraid to remember who you were. Be both. Be complete. Nora closed the notebook, set it down gently, like it was made of glass. For a long moment she didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there with her head bowed. Then she looked up at me, and what I saw in her eyes made my blood run cold. It wasn't grief anymore, it was something harder, colder. It was certainty. They killed him, she said quietly. Maybe not with their own hands, but they killed him, and they're going to kill others, the whole valley. Nora, no. She stood, the notebook clutched in her hands. No more, maybe we should call someone. No more, let the system handle it. James tried that. It killed him. The system is broken, Tomas. It's been broken for a long time, and the only thing these people understand is force. Miguel had climbed the ladder now. He'd heard everything. Mrs. Redpath, he said carefully, if what's in that notebook is true, we need to secure it. Make copies. Get it to federal investigators who aren't compromised. We will, Nora said. But first, we prepare. Because when they realize I have this evidence, they're going to come for it. For me. And this time it won't be polite offers and veiled threats. She looked at both of us. I need 3 days. Miguel, you'll continue working here. Normal routines, nothing suspicious. Tomas, same. Bring food like always. Act like nothing has changed. What are you going to do? I asked. What my grandfather taught me. What James's death demands of me. She touched the notebook gently. I'm going to turn Shadow Creek Ranch into a fortress. And when they come, and they will come, I'm going to show them that some land fights back. Miguel and I exchanged glances. We both understood. This was the point of no return. I'm in, Miguel said simply. Whatever you need. Me too, I added. Always. Nora nodded once. Then she descended the ladder, the blue notebook under her arm, and walked out into the afternoon sun. Through the barn door, I watched her go to James's grave behind the house, saw her kneel beside it, saw her lips moving, telling him maybe, or asking forgiveness, or making a new promise to replace the old one. When she stood, something had changed in the way she carried herself. The widow was still there. The gardener, the healer. But walking beside her now, visible to those who knew how to look, was someone else. White Knife's granddaughter. The last knife. And she was preparing for war. 3 days, that's all the time Nora gave herself to prepare. I watched her transform Shadow Creek Ranch from a peaceful homestead into something else, something tactical. She moved with quiet purpose, working mostly at night when prying eyes couldn't see. She dug, reinforced, positioned. Miguel helped during the days, following her instructions without question. Former Marine and Apache warrior working in silent understanding, they cleared fields of fire around the buildings, installed motion sensor lights disguised as ordinary ranch fixtures. Mapped every approach, every blind spot, every advantage the land could offer. I brought food and watched. That's what I did best. Bear witness, remember. On the second night, I found Nora in the barn, moving through combat forms I hadn't seen in decades. The sacred knife flashing in lantern light, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. She didn't stop when she noticed me watching. "My hands are slower than they were," she said, breathing hard. 20 years of peace. "The body remembers, but not perfectly." "You're mortal," I said, "like the rest of us. That's what worries me." She lowered the knife. White Knife used to say the most dangerous warrior is the one who knows they can die. Makes you careful, precise. But Tomas, what if careful isn't enough? Then you won't be alone. She looked at me with those dark eyes. I have to be. This is my fight, my land, my promise to James. "No," I said firmly. "It stopped being just your fight the moment we found that notebook. This is the whole valley's fight now. You're just the tip of the knife." She smiled faintly at that. Tip of the knife. White Knife would have liked that. On the third day, Wednesday morning, I arrived to find Miguel loading his Jeep. "What's happening?" I asked. "She's sending me away," he said. His jaw was tight, unhappy. "Wants me visible, driving through town, making it clear she's alone. Bait." "Yeah." He slammed the Jeep's door harder than necessary. "I don't like it, Tomas. She's setting herself up as a target." "That's exactly what she wants." Miguel turned to face me. "My uncle told me about her grandfather, about what she can do. But Tomas, she's one person. I've seen what happens when one person faces a coordinated team. It doesn't end well." "She's not planning to face them head on." "I know, but still." He looked toward the house where Nora was moving inside, visible through the window. "I'll be at the North Ridge, federal land outside her property line, but close. If I see her smoke signal isn't there at dawn, you'll come running. Faster than that." He extended his hand. "Take care of her, old man." "I'm not staying either," I said. "She made me promise to leave this afternoon." "Will you?" I thought about it, about promises and duty, about the girl I'd watched grow up, about what White Knife would have wanted. "I'll go to town," I said, "but I won't go home." We shook hands. Two men who couldn't fight the battle, but could be ready for whatever came after. That afternoon, Nora and I sat on the porch one last time. I'd made chicken soup. She didn't eat much, just pushed it around the bowl while Shadow dozed at her feet. "Tomas," she said finally, "if this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, there's a letter in my desk. Instructions. The ranch goes to the tribal council. The evidence against Helios goes to 3 different federal agencies. And—" She paused. "Tell Miguel he's a good man. Tell Manuel I'm grateful. Tell everyone I'm sorry for the trouble. Tell them yourself," I said, "when this is over." She smiled, but it was sad. "You've been like a father to me all these years. I want you to know that. And you've been like a daughter I never had." We sat in silence for a while, the desert spreading around us, painted gold by the afternoon sun. "Do you think James would forgive me?" she asked quietly, "for what I'm about to do?" I thought about the man who'd loved her, who'd accepted all of her, even the parts that frightened other people. "James knew who you were from the beginning," I said. "He loved the warrior and the gardener, both. And he knew that sometimes, when peace fails, the warrior has to stand up, not because she wants to, because she has to." Nora nodded slowly, touched the silver and turquoise necklace at her throat, the one her mother had given her. "Then I guess it's time," she said. She stood, hugged me hard. When she pulled back, I saw tears in her eyes for the first time in 3 years. "Go, Tomas, please. I need to do this part alone." I wanted to argue, to stay, to somehow protect her. But I understood. Some battles you have to face by yourself, not because you want to, because that's what honor demands. I drove back to Copper Springs as the sun touched the western horizon, and I prayed to every saint I knew that I'd see Nora Redpath again. What happened that night I learned later from multiple sources, from Nora herself, from Miguel, from Sheriff Manuel, who arrived at a crucial moment. From the evidence collected afterward, let me tell you the truth of it. As darkness fell, Nora performed a ceremony her grandfather had taught her. She stood at the fire pit, burning sage, speaking prayers in Apache, asking her ancestors for strength, asking James for forgiveness, asking the land itself to fight beside her. Shadow sat at her side, sensing what was coming. Around 9 o'clock, her motion sensors triggered. Vehicles approaching from the south. 8 men this time. Professional team. They'd learned from previous encounters, upgraded their approach. Nora watched from her hidden position in the barn loft as they spread out, surrounding the property, cutting off escape routes, setting up command posts near the bridge. She recognized Reyes among them, saw him positioning people, giving hand signals. Professional, efficient, but she also saw something else. The way he left the southern approach slightly exposed. The way he positioned one man where sight lines were blocked. Helping, she realized. Subtly, just enough. Then Blackwell arrived in an SUV with 2 more men, and someone else. Richard Kane, the CEO of Helios International himself, the man ultimately responsible for James's death. Nora felt something cold settle in her chest. Not rage, colder than that, certainty. They'd come for her evidence, for James's notebook, for the woman who threatened their billion-dollar operation. She let them get into position, let them think they had her trapped. Then she disappeared. The underground passages her ancestors had dug generations ago let Nora move beneath the very ground the Helios team controlled. She emerged behind them, triggered her prepared countermeasures. The irrigation system she'd modified flooded key areas, made footing treacherous, shorted out their equipment. Chickens burst from their coop in panicked chaos, disrupting sight lines, triggering motion sensors everywhere. And in the confusion, Nora struck. She moved like White Knife had taught her, using darkness, using terrain, using the enemy's own assumptions against them. The first 2 men went down without raising an alarm. Pressure points, nerve strikes, techniques designed to disable, not kill. She secured them with their own zip ties and moved on. But these weren't amateurs. The team adapted quickly. They spread out, communicated, coordinated. And Nora was 42 years old, 20 years removed from her training. Her body wasn't as fast as it once was. Her reflexes not as sharp. When she engaged the third pair, one of them got off a shot. The bullet caught her in the ribs. Just a graze, but it burned like fire. She felt blood, hot and wet, soaking her shirt. She finished the fight anyway. Both men down. But she was hurt now, moving slower. In the barn she paused to catch her breath, pressed her hand against the wound. Not fatal, but painful, weakening. Shadow found her there. The wolf dog licked her face, whining softly. "I know," she whispered, "but we're not done yet." Outside she heard Blackwell's voice rising in frustration, heard Kane barking orders. The professional operation was unraveling, and they knew it. 4 men down, 4 remaining, plus Blackwell and Kane. But Nora was injured and bleeding. The odds had shifted. That's when headlights appeared on the road from town. Not just one vehicle, a dozen, maybe more. Pickups and old sedans, Rosa's delivery van, the diner's truck, vehicles from all over Copper Springs converging on Shadow Creek Ranch. Sheriff Manuel led them, his motorcycle's engine cutting through the night. Behind him came people, armed with hunting rifles and shotguns. Not a mob. An army. Copper Springs defending its own. I was there too, riding with Rosa, watching as our quiet town became something else, something united. Manuel parked at the bridge, blocking the exit. His deputies flanked him. "This is Sheriff B," he called out, voice amplified by his radio. "I have reports of gunfire and armed trespass on private property. Everyone on Shadow Creek Ranch who doesn't belong here, you're under arrest unless you drop weapons and surrender immediately." Kane emerged from his position near the house. Even in darkness, I could see his face was tight with rage and calculation. "Sheriff, We're conducting a legal security operation with the landowner's permission. Funny, Manuel interrupted, because Mrs. Redpath filed a complaint 3 hours ago about threatened assault, and we found this in her mailbox. He held up papers. Even from a distance I could see the blue notebook's pages, photocopied and legally filed. Documentation of systematic water poisoning, Manuel continued. Fraudulent permits, attempted murder, all naming Helios International and its subsidiaries. Federal prosecutors are very interested in this evidence. That's fabricated. Is it? Manuel's voice hardened. Because we've got soil samples, water tests, medical records, and a dying man's testimony written in his own hand, naming your company for poisoning that killed him. I saw the moment Kane realized he'd lost, not just this battle, the war, everything. And that's when Nora emerged. She walked out of the barn, Shadow at her side, blood visible on her shirt, weapons secured but visible. She moved slowly, obviously hurt, but she stood straight, proud, unbroken. The townspeople fell silent as she appeared. I heard Rosa gasp, heard Lily from the diner whisper, "Dear God." Nora Redpath, the quiet widow they'd all thought was weak, who they'd pitied, stood there like something from the old stories, a warrior defending sacred ground. "It's over, Kane," she said. Her voice carried across the desert night. "You came for my land. You killed my husband. You planned to poison this entire valley." She held up a copy of James's notebook. "And now everyone knows." Reyes stepped forward then, away from the Helios team, hands visible, empty. "Mrs. Redpath is right," he said. "I'll testify. Everything I know about Helios operations, the contamination, the intimidation, all of it." Blackwell's face went white. He went, "Reyes, you son of a—" "My teacher was White Knife," Reyes said quietly. "He taught me that some things are worth more than money, worth more than orders. I forgot that for a while, but not anymore." Kane looked around, at the sheriff, at the armed townspeople, at his own team, half of them disabled and secured somewhere in the darkness, at Nora, bleeding but victorious, at Reyes, his head of security turned witness. "I want my lawyer," he said finally. "You'll need several," Manuel replied. He signaled his deputies. "Place them under arrest, all of them. Federal marshals are en route." It was nearly dawn when Miguel finally reached Nora. He'd been watching from the North Ridge, seen the lights, the vehicles. When no smoke signal appeared at sunrise, he'd come running just as he'd promised. He found her in the barn, being treated by Dr. Chen from Copper Springs. The bullet graze was cleaned and bandaged. She'd refused to go to the hospital. Shadow lay beside her. And that's when I saw it. The wolf dog was bleeding, a bullet wound in his shoulder. Not fatal, but serious. "What happened?" I asked, rushing to them. "During the fight," Nora said softly, stroking Shadow's head. "One of them got behind me. Shadow took the bullet meant for me." The big animal whined softly. Nora's hand trembled as she touched his fur. "He'll live," Dr. Chen said, "but it'll take time to heal, and he'll have a scar." Nora nodded, tears finally falling, not for herself, for the loyal companion who'd saved her life. Miguel knelt beside her. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," she corrected, looking around at the people from Copper Springs who'd stood with her, at Reyes, now giving his statement to federal agents, at Manuel, who had arrived at exactly the right moment. All of us. The sun rose over Shadow Creek Ranch, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Federal investigators were everywhere now, documenting evidence, arresting people. The whole operation that Helios had run for years was unraveling in real time. Blackwell had been taken away in handcuffs. Kane was being held for arraignment. The charges were mounting: fraud, environmental crimes, attempted murder, conspiracy. James's blue notebook had done what he'd hoped: stopped them, saved the valley. I found Nora sitting under the old mesquite tree, Shadow's head in her lap. The wolf dog was sedated but stable. "How are you?" I asked, settling beside her. "Tired," she said. "Sore, but alive." We sat in silence for a while, watching the desert wake up. "White Knife used to tell me," she said finally, That being a warrior wasn't about wanting to fight. It was about being willing to fight when everything else failed, about standing up when everyone else had fallen down. You honored his teaching, and James's. She touched the bandage at her ribs. I tried every other way first, legal, peaceful. But in the end, you did what had to be done. And you didn't do it alone. She looked at me then, really looked at me. Thank you, Tomas, for everything, for 35 years of being there, for believing in me, for remembering. That's what family does, I said simply. That was 5 years ago now, mijo. My grandson shifts in his chair, eyes wide. The sun has moved across the sky while I've been talking. The sage tea in my cup has gone cold. What happened after, he asks. To the ranch? To Nora? I smile. Come, I'll show you. We drive out to Shadow Creek Ranch. The road is better now. The conservation trust Helios was forced to establish as part of their settlement paid for improvements. As we approach, I see the changes. Solar panels on new outbuildings. An educational center where school groups come to learn about water conservation, gardens that teach sustainable desert agriculture, and in the center of it all, the old adobe house where James and Nora built their life together. Nora is there, of course, 57 now, her hair more silver than black. But she moves with the same grace, the same quiet strength. Shadow Creek Ranch didn't just survive, it became something bigger, a teaching place. A protected sanctuary, proof that sometimes standing up to power actually works. Shadow is there too, older and gray-muzzled, the scar on his shoulder visible when he moves. He greets us with a gentle woof, tail wagging. But what makes my grandson gasp is what we see in the yard. A dozen young girls, ages 8 to 16, practicing forms, learning knife techniques, moving through the ancient Apache combat traditions that White Knife passed to Nora. The last knife had become the first teacher of a new generation. Miguel, who never left after that night, supervises, offering corrections. He married Lily's daughter 2 years ago. They live in the renovated barn. Nora sees us and waves, walks over, wiping sweat from her forehead. Tomas, she says warmly, then looks at my grandson. And who is this? My grandson. I just told him your story, the true version, she laughs. Did you now? The boring parts too? Every part. Nora kneels to my grandson's level. What your grandfather probably didn't tell you is that the scary parts, the fighting parts, that was just one night, one moment in a whole life. The real story is longer. It's about choosing peace every day, growing things, teaching things, building community. She stands, looks back at her students, but also knowing that if peace fails, if someone threatens what's sacred, you stand up, you remember who you are, all of who you are. The widow and the warrior, my grandson says, remembering my words. Exactly, she smiles. Both real, both necessary, both me. We stay for dinner. I cook, naturally, using Nora's kitchen like old times. Chicken soup with sage, blue corn tortillas, the tastes that tie us all together. We eat outside as the sun sets. Nora and Miguel and the students, Rosa and Lily, who drove out to join us. Sheriff Manuel, retired now, but still riding his motorcycle. Even Reyes stops by. He works for the Tribal Land Management Office now, helping protect indigenous territories. He and Nora have a complicated friendship, two of White Knife's students finding their own paths to honor. After dinner, after everyone else is gone, Nora makes tea. Sage tea, naturally, the way her grandfather taught her. She pours 3 cups, one for me, one for her, one for my grandson. We sit on the porch as stars appear. Shadow dozes at our feet. The desert spreads away into darkness, peaceful and eternal. Tell me about White Knife, my grandson asks Nora. What was he really like? And she does. Stories I've never heard, moments from her childhood, lessons learned, wisdom passed down through generations. I listen, sipping my tea, and I think about how stories survive. Not the exciting parts everyone remembers, but the quiet parts, the true parts, The moments between action when real life happens. The scent of sage tea on a desert evening. An old man teaching a young girl patience and precision. A husband and wife building a garden together. A community standing together when it matters most. A warrior learning that the greatest strength is knowing when to fight and when to grow flowers. These are the parts that last. The parts worth remembering. My grandson drinks his sage tea slowly, his nose wrinkling at the unfamiliar taste. You'll learn to love it, Nora says gently. It's a taste that grows on you, like the desert itself, bitter at first. But if you give it time, you discover the sweetness underneath. We sit in comfortable silence as the night deepens around us. And I think, this is what we fought for. Not just land, not just justice. This exact moment. Peace hard-won and carefully kept. Stories passed down. Tea shared under stars. The next generation learning what matters. Some smells never leave you, I told my grandson at the beginning, but some tastes, they become part of who you are. The taste of sage tea and desert honey. The taste of home. The taste of survival. The taste of knowing that when everything else fails, when power and greed try to take what's sacred, ordinary people can stand up, can fight back, can win. Not because they're special, but because they remember who they are, all of who they are, widow and warrior, teacher and student, individual and community, past and future, all of it together like sage and honey, bitter and sweet. That's the truth of Shadow Creek Ranch. That's the story worth telling. And that, mijo, is what it means to be the last knife. Not the final one, but the one that endures.